Every landscape begins with a question. Why would anyone build a kingdom on top of a rock that appears almost impossible to climb? How can an entire village survive on a strip of land squeezed between Arctic mountains and a freezing sea? And what happens when people choose to live in places where volcanoes, glaciers, deserts, cliffs, and oceans seem to have left almost no room for human life? Across our planet, there are landscapes that appear to challenge the rules of geography. Mountains rise almost vertically from the ocean. Ancient cities cling to stone. Villages occupy valleys so narrow that sunlight struggles to reach them. Roads disappear into clouds, and isolated settlements survive in places where nature seems to have provided everything except an obvious reason to stay. But these places are not accidents. Behind each one is a story written over millions of years. Volcanoes built islands from the bottom of the ocean. Glaciers carved enormous corridors through mountains. Wind transformed stone into impossible shapes. Rivers cut through continents, and eventually, humans arrived. Instead of avoiding these landscapes, they adapted to them. They built homes, temples, roads, farms, fortresses, and entire communities in places that seem almost incompatible with civilization. And sometimes, the strangest part is not that these places exist. It is that people found a way to belong there. Our journey begins in Sri Lanka, where an enormous column of stone rises suddenly above a sea of tropical forest. From a distance, it looks almost artificial. A massive rock nearly 200 meters high. Standing alone above the surrounding plains, its cliffs are steep. Its summit appears isolated. And more than 15 centuries ago, someone looked at this natural fortress and imagined something extraordinary. A city in the sky. This is Sigiriya. Today, it is one of Sri Lanka's most recognizable landmarks. But long before staircases carried visitors toward its summit, the rock itself had already survived an extraordinary geological journey. Millions of years ago, volcanic activity beneath this landscape forced molten material toward the surface. The magma hardened. Then time began dismantling everything around it. Rain attacked the softer surrounding formations. Wind and water gradually removed weaker rock. Layer after layer disappeared. But the harder volcanic core remained. What survived was a gigantic natural tower. And in the 5th century, King Kashyapa I transformed that geological accident into political power. Rather than constructing a conventional palace on ordinary ground, he chose the summit. The location offered something every ruler understood immediately: visibility, defense, and intimidation. Anyone approaching Sigiriya would have seen the rock long before reaching it, but the fortress was designed so that the closer someone came, the more impressive it became. Below the cliffs, enormous gardens were constructed with extraordinary precision. Pools reflected the sky. Stone pathways crossed landscaped grounds. Boulder gardens used the natural terrain as part of the architecture. And sophisticated channels moved water throughout the complex. Some fountains were powered entirely by water pressure. More than 15 centuries later, several can still operate during periods of heavy rain, but the greatest statement waited above. Visitors climbing toward the summit once approached an enormous lion-shaped gateway. The final staircase passed directly through the creature. The structure itself has largely disappeared. Only the gigantic stone poles remain. Yet those poles reveal the scale of what once stood here. Imagine arriving centuries ago. After crossing gardens and climbing hundreds of steps, you would suddenly find yourself standing beneath a colossal lion carved into the mountain. and beyond it waited the royal palace. Higher still, traces of another world remain. Ancient frescoes survive beneath protected sections of the rock. Their colors have endured centuries of tropical heat, rain, political change, abandonment, and rediscovery. Nearby stands the famous Mirror Wall. Its polished surface once reflected passing visitors, but over the centuries, travelers began leaving inscriptions. Some wrote poetry, others recorded admiration for the paintings and landscape. Together, those writings became something unexpected. A record of how ordinary people experienced Sigiriya hundreds of years ago. The palace itself eventually disappeared. Wood decayed. Roofs collapsed. Political power moved elsewhere. The forest returned, but the mountain remained. And from its summit, the reason for choosing this impossible location becomes clear. The plains stretch toward the horizon in almost every direction. Forests surround ancient reservoirs. Distant mountains fade into tropical haze. Far below, people appear almost insignificant. Sigiriya was more than a fortress. It was an attempt to place human ambition above the landscape itself. But thousands of kilometers away, another community developed almost the opposite relationship with geography. Here, there was no ruler trying to dominate nature. There was barely enough land to build upon at all. Far above the Arctic Circle, the mountains of Norway's Lofoten Islands rise directly from the sea. Their dark granite walls are sharp, enormous and ancient. Between them lie narrow fjords filled with cold Atlantic water. And squeezed into one of the smallest gaps between mountain and ocean is a settlement that seems to have nowhere left to expand. Rain. At high tide, water reaches astonishingly close to the village. Red fishing cabins stand beside the shoreline. Bridges connect tiny islands. Fishing boats occupy protected pockets of water beneath peaks that rise almost vertically behind them. From above, rain looks almost misplaced, but the landscape explains everything. During the last ice age, enormous glaciers moved through these mountains. They did not simply pass over the terrain, they excavated it. Slowly, immense masses of moving ice carved valleys into ancient rock. When the climate warmed and the glaciers retreated, seawater flooded many of those valleys. The result was the dramatic system of fjords that now defines Norway's coastline. The mountains remained. The ocean entered between them, and only small fragments of usable land survived. Yet humans settled here because the sea offered something the mountains could not: food. Every winter, Arctic cod migrate toward the waters surrounding Lofoten. For generations, their arrival transformed these remote islands into one of Norway's most important seasonal fishing regions. Boats left the harbors. Families processed the catch, and enormous wooden racks filled with cod drying naturally in the Arctic air. The resulting stockfish could be stored for long periods and transported enormous distances. Long before tourists arrived with cameras and hiking equipment, dried fish connected these isolated islands with markets across Europe. The sea made life possible, but it also dictated the rhythm of that life. Winter brings darkness, storms cross the Norwegian Sea, waves strike the rocky coastline. Snow covers the mountains, and for weeks the sun barely rises. Then everything changes. Summer brings the midnight sun. Night almost disappears. Mountains remain illuminated long after ordinary sunset hours. The ocean reflects golden Arctic light, and hiking trails climb toward viewpoints where the true scale of Rhine becomes visible. One of the most famous ascents leads toward Rheinebringen. From high above the village, the geography suddenly makes sense. Water twists between islands like a flooded mountain valley. Homes occupy every practical fragment of flat ground. Roads bend around cliffs. Bridges jump across channels, and beyond them, jagged peaks continue toward the horizon. It is beautiful precisely because there is so little space, and somehow that limitation became the village's identity. Every year, the cod return. Boats leave the harbor again. Drying racks fill. Seasons change. Visitors come and go, but beneath the modern tourism, rain still follows a rhythm established by geography. Thousands of years before the first house appeared. From the Arctic Sea, our journey now turns south, far into the Atlantic, toward an island where the mountains were not pushed upward by colliding continents. They were built from below. Madeira rises from the ocean like the exposed summit of an enormous submerged world. Most of the volcanic structure supporting the island remains hidden beneath the Atlantic. What we see above water is only its highest portion, and near its center, the landscape becomes dramatically vertical. This is where Pico do Arriero rises approximately 1,818 meters above sea level. Some mornings, the road climbs through thick cloud until suddenly the mist ends. The sky becomes blue. Sunlight strikes the upper ridges, and below, instead of valleys, there is an ocean of cloud. The mountain appears to float above it. But this landscape began far below the waves. Over millions of years, volcanic eruptions repeatedly brought molten rock toward the surface. Layer after layer accumulated. The underwater volcano grew. Eventually, it broke through the Atlantic. An island was born. Then erosion began reshaping it. Rainwater carved ravines into the volcanic rock. Landslides removed enormous sections of mountain. Streams deepened valleys. Wind attacked exposed ridges. What remains today is a landscape of narrow summits, vertical walls, and deep valleys packed into an island of surprisingly modest size. The famous route between Pico do Arriero and Pico Ruivo exposes that terrain with almost no filter. Trails cross exposed ridges, staircases descend along steep mountain faces. Tunnels cut through solid rock. Clouds move across the route in minutes. One moment, the landscape stretches across enormous distances. The next, everything disappears under mist. But altitude has created something else here. Isolation. Moist Atlantic air rises against Madeira's mountains. As it climbs, it cools. Water condenses. Clouds form, and those clouds help sustain one of Europe's most unusual surviving ecosystems. The laurel forests of Madeira preserve descendants of vegetation that once occupied much larger areas. Millions of years ago, as climates changed elsewhere, many of those ancient forests disappeared. On Madeira, isolation and moisture allowed fragments to survive. Walking through them can feel like entering another geological period. Twisted trunks emerge from fog. Moss covers branches. Water drips constantly from leaves. And endemic species evolved in an environment separated from continental populations by hundreds of kilometers of ocean. Above those forests, conditions become harsher. Vegetation shrinks, rock dominates, wind crosses exposed ridges, and from the highest points, the island reveals its volcanic skeleton. But even this dramatic landscape feels almost welcoming compared with our next destination. Because there are places where humans did not merely build beside mountains. They carved their homes directly into them. In southern Italy, the city of Matera appears almost to grow from the rock itself. From across the ravine, hundreds of pale stone structures overlap one another along the slope. Roofs become roads. Roads become rooftops. Staircases disappear between buildings. Churches emerge from cliffs, and behind many ordinary-looking entrances lies something much older, a cave. Matera's famous Sassi districts developed around natural and excavated cavities in relatively soft limestone. Humans have occupied this landscape for thousands of years. Generation after generation expanded natural shelters, carved rooms deeper into stone, constructed facades outside them, and connected the settlement through narrow passages. The result is neither completely natural nor completely artificial. It is both. The geology became the architecture, and the architecture became the city. From a distance, Matera can appear almost timeless, but survival here required more than carving rooms into rock. Water was one of the greatest challenges. Rainfall could be unpredictable. So residents developed an intricate system for collecting and storing it. Roofs, courtyards, channels, and underground cisterns worked together to capture precious water. Nothing was wasted. The city effectively behaved like a giant stone machine designed to survive in a dry environment. Yet Matera's story is not simply one of ancient ingenuity. By the 20th century, overcrowding and poor sanitation had created severe living conditions in parts of the Sassi. Residents were relocated. For a period, the cave districts became symbols of poverty and neglect. Then, perceptions changed. Restoration began. Ancient structures were preserved. Homes became hotels, museums, restaurants, and cultural spaces. A landscape once considered unsuitable for modern life became internationally celebrated. And that transformation raises a deeper question. Why do humans repeatedly return to difficult places? Perhaps because difficulty can create identity. A cliff becomes protection. A desert becomes isolation. A mountain becomes sacred. A cave becomes shelter. And sometimes, an environment that appears hostile from the outside becomes home to generations of people who understand it better than anyone else. But there is another place where this relationship becomes even more extreme. A landscape where rain is scarce, vegetation almost disappears, and enormous stone formations rise from the desert, like the ruins of another planet. In southern Jordan, the desert of Wadi Rum stretches beneath towering sandstone and granite mountains. At first, the landscape appears empty. Then the scale begins to reveal itself. Cliffs rise hundreds of meters. Natural arches span open air. Narrow canyons disappear between rock walls. Sand changes from pale gold to deep red as the light moves across the desert. And scattered throughout this seemingly empty wilderness are traces of people who have crossed it for thousands of years. The landscape was shaped by forces working at radically different speeds. Ancient geological processes created the underlying formations. Tectonic activity fractured the rock. Then erosion began exploiting those weaknesses. Wind carried abrasive sand. Occasional rainfall entered cracks. Temperature changes stressed exposed surfaces. Over immense periods of time, weaker material disappeared. Harder formations remained. The result is a desert filled with isolated towers and walls that can look deliberately constructed. But Wadi Rum is not empty. It never truly was. Ancient inscriptions and rock art preserve evidence of people who traveled through the region long before modern roads. Later, Bedouin communities developed ways of navigating, finding water, raising animals, and surviving across an environment where resources could be separated by enormous distances. To outsiders, the desert may appear almost identical in every direction. To someone who understands it, subtle details become a map, the shape of a mountain, the direction of a valley, the position of stars, the location of seasonal water. Even the texture of the ground can carry information, and when daylight begins to disappear, the desert changes again. Shadows climb the cliffs, sand darkens, rock walls turn red. Then the sun drops behind the mountains. For a brief moment, the entire landscape seems to burn, and after darkness arrives, another world appears overhead. Far from major cities, the desert sky becomes crowded with stars. The same landscape that seems brutally exposed during the day becomes almost infinite at night. Yet beyond these silent mountains lies another kind of impossible landscape. One not created by dryness, but by water. A place where an entire community appears to hover between mountain and lake, where roads give way to boats, houses stand above the surface, and the boundary between land and water becomes increasingly difficult to define. And it is there that our journey continues. Nature does not create with human proportions in mind. Across our planet, wind, water, fire, and time have been working together for millions of years, raising mountains above the clouds, opening enormous wounds in the ground, and hollowing out secret worlds beneath landscapes that appear completely ordinary. Some of these places are beautiful in ways that feel almost impossible to explain. Light falls through openings in the earth and illuminates forests growing underground. Rivers vanish beneath mountains, only to continue flowing through chambers large enough to hide entire city blocks. Waterfalls descend into pits so deep that the people standing near them become almost invisible. And in places untouched by sunlight, crystals have grown silently for hundreds of thousands of years until they became larger than the humans who eventually discovered them. These landscapes remind us that nature is not only powerful, it is patient. A river does not need to break through a mountain in a single moment. Given enough time, a single drop of water can weaken stone, widen a fracture, and begin creating a world that no one on the surface knows exists. A crystal does not need to grow quickly. Protected from disturbance, it can continue expanding molecule by molecule, long after generations of human beings have come and gone. But beauty on this scale rarely arrives without danger. Some of these places are almost impossible to enter. Their walls fall vertically for hundreds of meters. Their passages flood without warning. Their air can become too hot to breathe, while darkness conceals cliffs, rivers, and enormous spaces beneath the ground. To explore them is to cross a boundary between the familiar world and something far older. In these environments, roads disappear. Ordinary measurements lose their meaning. Human voices weaken into distant echoes, and the people moving through the landscape become tiny figures surrounded by structures they could never hope to build. From above, they appear like points of color against an endless wilderness. From below, they stand beneath formations so enormous that even looking upward is not enough to understand their full scale. These are not imaginary worlds created for cinema. They are real places, formed by geological forces still operating beneath our feet. And our journey begins beneath a mountain in northern Mexico, where miners accidentally opened a chamber that had remained sealed from humanity. What their lights revealed did not resemble an ordinary cave. It looked like a palace constructed for giants. Translucent columns crossed the darkness like frozen beams of light. Enormous mineral blades rose from the floor, while others stretched through the chamber at impossible angles. Some were longer than buses. Others weighed many tons. Yet the explorers standing among them could not remain for long. Because although this underground world appeared to be made of ice, the air surrounding it was hot enough to place the human body in immediate danger. This is the Cave of the Crystals, hidden approximately 300 meters beneath Naka, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, and entering it means stepping into one of the most beautiful and physically hostile underground environments ever discovered. The chamber belongs to the vast Naka mine, a working complex historically excavated for lead, zinc, and silver. For decades, miners cut tunnels through the mountain without knowing that an extraordinary world existed beyond the rock. Then, in the year 2000, workers opening a new passage broke through a limestone wall. Behind it was a chamber unlike any they had seen. Their lights revealed enormous white crystals rising from the floor and crossing one another like the beams of some unfinished cathedral. Some extended for approximately 11 meters. A human standing beside them appeared no larger than a child beside a mature tree. These were not ordinary quartz crystals. They were composed of selenite, a transparent crystalline form of gypsum. Some were clear enough for light to pass through their interiors. Others appeared milky white, their surfaces marked by delicate fractures created over immense periods. Together, they transformed the chamber into something that seemed designed rather than formed. But the miners had not simply discovered an underground palace. They had opened a chamber that the human body was never built to survive. Temperatures inside could approach 50 degrees Celsius, while the relative humidity remained above 90%. Inside the Cave of the Crystals, however, the air is already filled with moisture. Sweat struggles to evaporate. The body's natural cooling system begins to fail. Heart rate increases, strength fades, clear thinking becomes difficult, and every breath draws hot, moisture-filled air into the lungs. Thousands of kilometers away, beneath the tropical forests of central Vietnam, rivers carved through ancient limestone until the mountain became hollow. What formed inside was so enormous that it developed rivers, mist, clouds, and forests of its own. This is Son Doong Cave, situated within Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park in Vietnam's Quang Binh province. At the surface, dense jungle covers a landscape of limestone ridges and steep valleys. Heavy rain falls across the region. Water enters fractures in the rock, disappears beneath the forest, and continues moving through darkness. Hidden among this difficult terrain was an entrance known only by the sound of rushing water and powerful wind emerging from the mountain. In the early 1990s, a local man named Ho Khan encountered the opening while traveling through the forest. But the entrance was remote, surrounded by vegetation and difficult to locate again. Years passed before Ho Khan successfully returned and guided cave specialists to the site. In 2009, the first major survey began revealing the astonishing dimensions of the world beyond the entrance. The explorers had not entered an ordinary cave passage. They had entered one of the largest documented cave passages on Earth. Its walls rise like cliffs. Its ceiling disappears into darkness, and an underground river follows the base of the passage through the mountain. In some chambers, powerful lights reveal only fragments of the surrounding space. A beam may reach part of a wall, a distant boulder, or a section of the ceiling, but the entire chamber remains too large to illuminate at once. People moving across the floor appear like tiny points of light. Their voices weaken into echoes. Distances become difficult to judge. Objects that appear close can require a long journey across boulder fields, river crossings, and slippery cave deposits. Son Doong was created through a process that began with rain. As rainwater passed through the atmosphere and forest soil, it absorbed carbon dioxide and became mildly acidic.